At 14:23 on the afternoon of June 4th, 1942, in the waters northeast of Midway Atoll, the shrill wail of anti-aircraft sirens still lingered on the main deck of the USS Yorktown CV-5, an aircraft carrier of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The roar of Japanese Type 99 carrier dive bombers pierced through the clouds. John Luce, a 32-year-old first-class machinist aboard the Yorktown, was squatting at the entrance to the number 1 boiler room's maintenance passage, checking the morning power system inspection records. Suddenly, a violent jolt shook the carrier from below, sending the logbook flying from his hand. The ear-splitting screech of twisting steel followed instantly. Thick smoke billowed through gaps in the deck, and red fire alarm lights flashed frantically in the passageway. An urgent announcement blared over the loudspeaker. Port side hit. Boiler rooms number 3 and number 4 damaged. Close all relevant pipelines immediately. All maintenance personnel assemble at once. At that moment, the waters of Midway were engulfed in the white-hot intensity of a pivotal battle in the Pacific War. 3 U.S. carrier task forces lay concealed, poised to ambush the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet as it moved to attack Midway. For their part, the Japanese relied on their powerful carrier strike force, intent on destroying the remaining strength of the U.S. Pacific Fleet and seizing complete control of the Central Pacific's maritime dominance. The Yorktown, part of Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's Task Force 17, was one of only 3 operational U.S. carriers at the time. It bore the critical responsibility of intercepting Japanese carriers and covering the Midway garrison. As Luce prepared to rise and head for the assembly point, a second, even more powerful shock wave rocked the ship. Steel plates began to fall from the passage ceiling, and scalding steam mixed with black smoke erupted from ruptured pipes, instantly raising the surrounding temperature to over 50 degrees Celsius. Luce instinctively threw his arms over his head. The choking smoke triggered a fit of violent coughing, blurring his vision completely. Groping for the handrail along the passage wall, he struggled to his feet and stumbled toward the assembly point indicated over the loudspeaker. Along the way, he saw sailors sprinting with fire hoses, others shouting for their comrades. The deck was littered with spent shell casings, torn life vests, and debris from carrier aircraft tossed about by bomb blasts. "Luce, over here!" Lieutenant Turner, the head of the maintenance department, waved through the smoke, his uniform dotted with holes burned by steam, his face streaked with soot. "How bad is the boiler room?" Luce asked, coughing, as he hurried to Turner's side. "Catastrophic," Turner replied, his voice thick with anxiety. 2 Japanese 250-kilogram armor-piercing bombs scored direct hits on the port-side boiler rooms. Boilers number 3 and number 4 are completely out of commission. The main steam line to boiler number 5 is ruptured, causing massive steam leakage. The entire aft engine room is flooded with smoke and steam. Power output is practically zero. The captain just issued an order. We need to restore partial power immediately. Otherwise, we're a sitting duck for the Japanese, and we won't be able to recover our combat air patrol and strike aircraft returning from missions. How many maintenance personnel do we have available? Luce wiped the soot from his face, his gaze steady as he looked at Turner. 12, including you, Turner responded quickly, handing him an oil-stained gas mask. Our protective gear is critically low. Only 4 sets of basic gas masks left, and just 3 pairs of heat-resistant gloves. Most of our tools were buried or destroyed in the bombing. This is the most intact one we've got, Turner said. Luce took the mask, quickly checking the filter canister. He noted its effectiveness was severely diminished, but he didn't hesitate, pulling it over his face. Round up all usable tool, Luce ordered, his voice muffled but unwavering through the mask. Form a repair team with our strongest, most experienced men. I'll lead them in. Inform the captain we'll do everything we can to restore power, but we need time. And the deck firefighters need to suppress the external fires in the boiler room area to reduce smoke infiltration. At that moment, the USS Yorktown was dead in the water, a massive steel leviathan adrift silently on the waves. Above, U.S. carrier fighters tangled fiercely with Japanese bombers and fighters. The rattle of machine gun fire and the thunder of exploding aircraft echoed endlessly. On the surface, the Japanese fleet closed in rapidly. If the Yorktown could not regain power, It would not only be destroyed by subsequent Japanese attacks, but U.S. carrier strength in the Midway area would be reduced by a third, a blow that could potentially reverse the entire course of the Battle of Midway. It is crucial to note that at this time, the U.S. Navy had only 3 carriers in the Midway theater: the Enterprise, the Hornet, and the Yorktown. The Japanese, by contrast, fielded 4 fleet carriers: the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryū, enjoying superiority in both carrier numbers and aircraft complement. The survival of the Yorktown was directly tied to the U.S. ability to seize the initiative in this decisive battle. Luce quickly assembled his 11 maintenance personnel, a mix of veteran boilermen, pipe fitters, and young apprentices. Looking at his men, their faces streaked with soot, their eyes weary yet resolute, Luce offered no lengthy pep talk, only concise orders. Split into 3 teams. Team 1 will clear the debris blocking the boiler room entrance and open a path inside. Team 2 will take the repair tools and spare parts, follow me in, and assess the damage. Team 3 will remain at the hatch, responsible for passing tools and supplies, while monitoring temperature and toxic gas levels inside. If conditions become critical, sound the evacuation alarm immediately. He paused, adding, "The conditions inside are extremely dangerous. Extreme heat, thick smoke, toxic fumes, and the constant risk of further pipe ruptures and explosions. Remember, our objective is to get at least 2 boilers operational so the ship can move slowly. If anyone can't go on, speak up. Don't push yourselves too hard." No one stepped forward. These non-combatants, though unarmed and untrained in combat, understood their mission implicitly at that moment. The Yorktown was more than just their ship. It was their home and a vital weapon in the fight against Japan. If the carrier sank, most of them would perish at sea, and the Pacific War would become infinitely more difficult. "Ready?" Luce asked. "Ready," the 11 men replied in unison, their voices quiet but unshakable. On the deck above, firefighters were already working frantically to suppress the external fires in the boiler room area. High-pressure water jets collided with scalding steam, generating thick clouds of white mist that mingled with black smoke, shrouding the entire stern of the carrier in a murky haze. Luce led Team 1, armed with shovels and crowbars, to clear the debris blocking the boiler room entrance. Jagged steel plates, twisted pipes, and shattered equipment lay jumbled together, making every shovel of debris a grueling effort. The hot steel plates burned their palms through their gloves. Thick smoke seeped through the cracks, triggering constant coughing. The gas mask filters grew increasingly ineffective, and the acrid stench still managed to penetrate their nostrils. As soon as they entered the passage, a wave of intense heat washed over them, as if it would incinerate them alive. Luce felt his skin burning. The mask's lens fogged instantly, rendering him nearly blind. He navigated forward solely by his intimate knowledge of the boiler room's layout, feeling his way along the pipes. The steel plates lining the passage walls were scorching hot. A single accidental brush left a red mark. The air was filled with the hissing of escaping steam, like venomous snakes striking, and the crackling of flames, punctuated by the distant thunder of aerial combat. These sounds merged into a suffocating symphony of war. At last, Luce led Team 2 into the boiler room itself. The sight that greeted them left everyone gasping in horror. The room was a scene of utter devastation. Boilers number 3 and number 4 were completely mangled, gaping shell holes torn through their casings, flames still raging inside. The main steam line to boiler number 5 was severed in several places, with scalding steam jetting out in white plumes. The floor was covered in a sludgy mixture of oil and water, littered with shards of metal. The overhead lights were all shattered, leaving only the flickering glow of the fire to illuminate the darkness. Luce switched on his flashlight. The beam cut feebly through the smoke, illuminating the damage. He assessed the situation quickly, making mental notes. Boilers number 3 and number 4 are total losses, beyond repair. Boiler number 5's casing is intact, but the main steam line has 2 major ruptures and multiple damaged branch pipes. Boiler number 6 has minor damage with slight steam leakage from the pipes, likely repairable. Boilers number 1 and number 2 are in the forward engine room. We haven't received reports of damage yet, but we need to confirm they weren't affected. His voice, muffled by the mask, was hoarse, but his mind remained razor-sharp. Our priority now is to repair the steam lines to boilers number 5 and number 6, and get these two boilers operational again as soon as possible. Luce turned to the men beside him. Tom, Jack, you're on boiler number 6. Locate the leaks, seal them, and make the repairs. Peter, Mike, and I will handle boiler number 5. First, we'll cut off both ends of the broken main line, clean the fittings, and install the replacement pipe. The rest of you will pass tools and parts and keep an eye on the surroundings. If you spot any trouble, alert everyone immediately. With the assignments given, the maintenance crew sprang into action. Luce, Peter, and Mike moved to the ruptured main steam line of boiler number 5, the hottest spot in the room, where steam was gushing most violently. Their first task was to close the steam valve to boiler number 5 before any repairs could begin. But the valve was located perilously close to the broken pipe, and the scalding steam made it impossible to approach. "We need to block this steam," Luce shouted. He scanned the area and spotted a piece of damaged steel plate nearby. He signaled to Peter and Mike, and together they heaved the plate into position, creating a makeshift barrier in front of the broken pipe. As soon as the plate was in place, it glowed red-hot from the intense heat, hissing as the paint blistered and peeled away. Using the plate as cover, Luce finally managed to reach the valve. Pulling on one of the precious, heat-resistant gloves, he held his breath and carefully reached out to grasp the valve wheel, forcing it to turn in the closing direction. The valve, warped by the extreme heat, was stiff beyond belief. Every fraction of a turn required immense effort. Luce's arm bulged with veins, sweat streaming down his arms and sizzling into steam upon contact with the hot steel plate. Peter and Mike struggled to hold the shield in place, providing him with cover. After nearly 5 grueling minutes of effort, the valve was finally shut tight, and the steam gushing from the broken pipe gradually subsided. Every 5 minutes, Team 3 at the hatch called down to check on their condition and relay the latest battlefield updates from outside. "Luce, the Japanese aircraft have withdrawn, but their fleet is still closing in, about 80 nautical miles away." "Luce, the captain just issued an order. We must restore partial power within 1 hour, or we'll have to abandon ship." Each message was like a whip, driving the exhausted repair crew to work faster, steeling their resolve to finish the job against the clock. Time ticked away relentlessly. The temperature inside the boiler room continued to climb. The smoke grew thicker, and the men's strength rapidly faded. The gas mask filters were now completely useless. The acrid smell of carbon monoxide filled their lungs, leaving them dizzy and nauseous. Luce felt his consciousness begin to blur, his vision swimming. He recognized the symptoms of poisoning, but he couldn't afford to collapse. As the leader of the repair team, his failure would mean the mission's failure. "Drink some water," Peter beside him offered a canteen. Luce took it, unscrewed the cap, and took a small sip. The cool water slid down his parched throat, briefly easing his dizziness and the burning sensation in his throat. He took a deep breath, shook his head vigorously to clear his mind. "Hurry up! We're running out of time," he shouted, his voice even hoarser now, but brimming with unyielding resolve. He picked up the replacement pipe, aligned it with the cut ends of the main line, and signaled for Peter and Mike to help hold it in place before starting the welding work. Sparks from the welder flickered through the smoke, illuminating his sweat and soot-streaked face and his determined eyes. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the chamber. A steel plate, warped by the extreme heat, had fallen from the ceiling, crashing to the ground less than a meter away from Luce. The impact sent a spray of oil and water flying. Luce and the other men were startled, but they didn't pause their work. They glanced at the fallen debris briefly before returning their full attention to the welding. "Watch the ceiling," Luce shouted, warning the others to stay alert. On the Yorktown's bridge, Rear Admiral Fletcher stood at the command station, his brow furrowed as he stared anxiously at the distant horizon. In his hand was an intelligence report indicating that the Japanese carrier Hiryū had spotted the Yorktown and was preparing to launch another attack wave. "Any word from the repair team?" Fletcher asked, his voice edged with anxiety. "No word yet, sir," his aide replied. "It's been 40 minutes. We have no idea what's happening inside the boiler room." Fletcher fell silent for a moment, then ordered, "Give them 10 more minutes. If we don't have power restored by then, issue the abandoned ship order immediately and start evacuating the crew. Inside the boiler room, Luce finally completed the welding of the main steam line to boiler number 5. He stood up, stretching his stiff arms, feeling as if his entire body was made of lead. "Check the joint for leaks," Luce instructed Peter and Mike. The two men immediately shone their flashlights on the welded seam, finding no signs of leakage whatsoever. "The joint is solid, no leaks," Peter exclaimed triumphantly. Luce nodded, then turned and walked toward boiler number 6. By this time, Tom and Jack had already sealed all the leaks on boiler number 6. "Boiler number 6 repaired, ready for pressure testing," Tom reported. "Start the pressure test immediately," Luce ordered. The maintenance crew sprang into action, opening the fuel valves to boilers number 5 and number 6, igniting the burners to begin the test. The needle on the pressure gauge crept upward slowly, and every eye was fixed intently upon it. If the pressure could stabilize within the normal operating range, the repairs would be a success. If the pressure dropped, it would mean there were still leaks that needed to be found and fixed. At that moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl, every second stretching into an eternity. The pressure gauge needle continued to rise, eventually stabilizing at 80% of the normal operating pressure. "Pressure stable! No leaks detected!" the crewman monitoring the gauge shouted excitedly. At the sound of this news, the entire repair team breathed a collective sigh of relief, their faces breaking into exhausted yet grateful smiles. Luce also let out a long, pent-up breath, his taut nerves finally relaxing. He walked over to the boiler control panel and slowly opened the steam valves, sending steam to the turbines. "Notify the bridge. Boilers number 5 and number 6 are repaired. Steam is being supplied to the turbines. We expect to generate power in 5 minutes." Luce radioed the message to the maintenance team at the hatch. The men at the hatch immediately relayed the news to the bridge. "Admiral, the repair team reports boilers number 5 and number 6 are operational. Power generation expected in 5 minutes," the aide reported excitedly to Rear Admiral Fletcher. A faint smile finally crossed Fletcher's face. He immediately ordered, "Prepare to get underway as soon as power is restored. Notify all carrier aircraft squadrons. The Yorktown will soon be mobile and ready to recover returning aircraft." 5 minutes later, the Yorktown's propellers began to turn slowly. The carrier had finally regained partial power. Though its maximum speed was only about 10 knots, far below its normal cruising speed of 32 knots, it was mobile again, no longer a stationary target for the Japanese. Luce and his repair team emerged from the boiler room. Every man looked like he had crawled out of a mud pit, covered head to toe in oil and soot, their uniforms torn and tattered, their faces and hands covered in burns and cuts. But their eyes shone with pride and exhaustion. Luce looked up at the sky, watching as U.S. carrier aircraft returned one by one, flying toward the Yorktown. A powerful sense of accomplishment surged within him. He knew their efforts had not been in vain. They had given the Yorktown a fighting chance, and in doing so, had preserved a critical platform for victory in the Battle of Midway. However, Luce and his team had no time to rest. They knew full well that another Japanese attack could come at any moment. The Yorktown's power system was still fragile, requiring further inspection and repairs. Luce quickly issued orders for the follow-up maintenance tasks, then led several crewmen back into the engine room. Their battle was far from over. In the hours to come, they would continue to work in the sweltering, high-pressure environment, constantly repairing the damaged power system to provide the Yorktown with more stable power, preparing to face the even fiercer battles that lay ahead. This extraordinary repair mission, carried out by non-combat personnel, would become a little-known yet crucial chapter in the history of the Battle of Midway, forever etched into the annals of the Pacific War. At 15:30 on the afternoon of June 4th, 1942, the temperature inside the Yorktown's aft engine room remained steadily above 55 degrees Celsius. Luce led 3 maintenance crewmen back into the narrow maintenance passage. The beam of their flashlights cut weak paths through the lingering smoke, illuminating the black oil deposits caked on the pipe walls and the scattered metal shards that hadn't been cleaned up. Fresh from the first round of repairs, their lungs still burned with every breath. Their gas masks were long since useless. They could only hold their breath to minimize their exposure to the smoke-filled air. "First, we need to inspect the interlocking pipelines for boilers number 1 and number 2 to make sure the forward engine room's power system wasn't affected," Luce said, his voice noticeably hoarse. He pulled a crumpled copy of the power system blueprints from his pocket and spread it out on a scalding hot pipe. The edges of the paper curled instantly from the heat. It is important to note that the Yorktown's power configuration was the standard design for U.S. Navy aircraft carriers at the time. 6 Babcock and Wilcox heavy oil-fired boilers paired with 4 General Electric steam turbines, divided between forward and aft engine rooms. The forward engine room housed boilers number 1 and number 2, along with 2 steam turbines, which drove the carrier's portside propellers. The aft engine room contained boilers number 3 through number 6, and the other 2 turbines driving the starboard side propellers. This compartmentalized layout offered a critical advantage. Damage to one engine room would not completely disable the ship's power. However, the Japanese bombs had struck the heart of the aft engine room with pinpoint accuracy. Boilers number 3 and number 4 were destroyed outright, and the steam lines to boilers number 5 and number 6 were extensively damaged. This effectively crippled the starboard power system. Relying solely on the 2 boilers in the forward engine room was insufficient to support the carrier's tactical maneuvering. Just then, the ship shuddered slightly. An alarm blared over the loudspeaker once more. Japanese reconnaissance plane approaching, 60 nautical miles from the ship. All units prepare for anti-aircraft action. Luce's heart clenched instantly. The appearance of a reconnaissance plane meant another air attack could be imminent, in as little as half an hour. Hurry up. We have to get the aft engine room's 2 boilers up to at least 60% of their full load before the Japanese bombers arrive, Luce shouted, quickening his pace. They had to improve the carrier's maneuverability as quickly as possible. Otherwise, even with partial power restored, it would be unable to evade the Japanese bombers' precision attacks. To understand the destructive power of the Japanese bombing, it is essential to examine the Type 99 carrier dive bombers and their ordnance used in the attack on the Yorktown. The Type 99, codenamed Val, was the main carrier dive bomber of the Imperial Japanese Navy in the early stages of World War II. With a length of 10.2 meters and a wingspan of 14.36 meters, it had a maximum speed of 432 kilometers per hour and a maximum range of 1,430 kilometers. Its deadliest weapon was the 250-kilogram armor-piercing bomb that had struck the Yorktown. Featuring a hardened steel casing packed with 63 kilograms of TNT explosive and fitted with a delayed action fuse, this bomb could penetrate an aircraft carrier's flight deck and lower decks before detonating inside the hull, causing massive structural damage and fires. The fact that 2 such bombs had scored direct hits on the Yorktown was a testament to the accuracy and destructive power of the Japanese attack. Back in the aft engine room, Luce discovered a blockage in the auxiliary fuel line to boiler number 5. By this time, the temperature inside the room had climbed again, reaching 62 degrees Celsius. The crewmen's uniforms were soaked completely through with sweat, clinging to their bodies and mixing with the oil to form a thick, sticky layer of grime. Their lips were cracked and parched, their throats burning with thirst, but not a single man stopped working. Luce pulled the last half bottle of water from his pocket and handed it to a young apprentice beside him. "Take a sip, pass it around." The young sailor took the bottle, drank a tiny mouthful carefully, then passed it on to the next man. In this extreme environment, every drop of water was a precious commodity. At 16:10, the Japanese reconnaissance plane departed the Yorktown's airspace, but everyone knew this was merely the calm before the storm. Luce led his team in a comprehensive inspection of boiler number 6, discovering that one of the previously sealed leaks had begun to show slight signs of steam seepage. "We have to reseal this. Reinforce it with a metal patch," Luce ordered. They immediately retrieved a metal patch and bolts, secured the patch over the leak, then tightened the bolts with wrenches. Working in the cramped space, power tools were useless. Everything had to be done by hand. Each bolt had to be tightened to the maximum to ensure the leak would not recur. The crewmen took turns, their arms aching so badly they could barely lift them, but no one complained. It should be added that the boiler pipes aboard the Yorktown were made of high-strength alloy steel. While this material offered excellent heat resistance and pressure tolerance, it was extremely difficult to weld and repair. The welding equipment used by Luce and his team was the standard portable arc welder issued to U.S. Navy ships at the time, weighing 25 kilograms with an output of 220 amps. Even under normal conditions, operating it required two men working together. In the sweltering, smoke-filled, and cramped confines of the engine room, the difficulty was multiplied exponentially. Furthermore, the spare pipes and metal patches they used were emergency supplies carried aboard the Yorktown. Their quantity was strictly limited. Once they were gone, no further repairs would be possible. At 16:30, the leak on boiler number 6 was successfully reinforced and the pressure stabilized at 75% of the normal operating level. The pressure in boiler number 5 was also increased to 80% of its normal capacity. Luce immediately ordered, "Start the two steam turbines in the aft engine room. Link them with the forward engine room's power system and test the carrier's maximum speed." The maintenance crew moved quickly to follow the order, flipping the switches to engage the turbines. As the turbine's roar grew louder, the Yorktown's hull began to accelerate slowly. The speed indicator on the bridge showed the carrier's speed increasing steadily from the previous 10 knots to 16 knots. "Speed at 16 knots! Power system operating stably!" The order from the bridge was relayed over the radio to the engine room. At the sound of this news, Luce and his maintenance crew broke into long-awaited smiles. A speed of 16 knots, while still below the Yorktown's maximum capability, was sufficient to allow the carrier to perform effective tactical maneuvers, to evade Japanese bombing, and crucially, to safely recover returning carrier aircraft. It is vital to understand that for carrier aircraft to land safely, the carrier must maintain a certain forward speed to reduce the relative wind speed, thereby increasing the safety margin of the landing. If the carrier's speed is too slow, aircraft risk overshooting the flight deck or crashing because they cannot align accurately with the landing area. However, just as everyone began to feel a glimmer of hope, a new crisis emerged. One of the steam turbines in the aft engine room suddenly began making an abnormal noise, and its rotation speed became unstable. Luce immediately led two crewmen to the turbine, shining their flashlights to inspect it. They discovered that the turbine's bearings had become severely worn due to the extreme heat and prolonged high-load operation. "The bearings are badly worn. We have to replace them immediately. Otherwise, the turbine could fail completely at any moment," Luce said, his expression grim. Replacing steam turbine bearings was an extremely complex and time-consuming task. It required disassembling the turbine's outer casing, removing the damaged bearings, and installing new ones. Under normal conditions in a maintenance workshop, this job would require at least 4 men and take more than 3 hours to complete. In their current environment, the difficulty was unimaginable. "We have no choice. We have to replace the bearings as quickly as possible." Luce did not hesitate for a moment, immediately assigning tasks. "Peter and I will disassemble the turbine casing. Mike and Tom will locate the spare bearings. The rest of you will provide support and monitor the surrounding environment." The maintenance crew sprang into action at once. Disassembling the turbine casing required a variety of tools: wrenches, screwdrivers, crowbars. The cramped space forced them to take turns working. Every movement was a struggle. The turbine casing was scorching hot, and even through their gloves they could feel the intense heat burning their hands. Luce's fingers were cut by the sharp edge of the casing, and blood flowed immediately, but he merely wiped it away with his sleeve and kept working. At 16:50, the Japanese air raid alarm blared once again. "Japanese bomber formation approaching. 30 nautical miles from the ship. All units man your anti-aircraft battle stations immediately." The anti-aircraft guns on the deck opened fire furiously. The deafening boom, boom, boom of the cannons filled the air, and the shells exploded overhead, creating a barrier of white smoke. Inside the engine room, the maintenance crew heard the alarm and felt a surge of anxiety, but they did not stop working. "Faster! We have to finish replacing the bearings before the bombers arrive," Luce shouted, his voice trembling with tension. Just then, Mike and Tom finally located the spare bearings and rushed them to Luce. Luce immediately installed the new bearings into the turbine and began reassembling the casing. The reassembly process was just as difficult. Each bolt had to be precisely aligned with its hole and tightened securely. The men's sweat dripped continuously onto the turbine, hissing as it evaporated instantly. Time ticked away relentlessly. The Japanese bomber formation drew nearer and nearer, and the sound of anti-aircraft fire on the deck grew increasingly intense. At 17:10, Just as the Japanese bombers were about to enter their attack range, Luce finally completed the replacement of the turbine bearings. "Start the turbine! Test its operation!" Luce shouted. The turbine restarted with a steady, powerful roar, its rotation speed stabilizing within the normal range. "Operation normal! Power system restored to stable condition!" The crewman monitoring it shouted excitedly. Luce let out a long breath and collapsed to the floor. Only then did he feel the full extent of his exhaustion. His arms and shoulders ached so badly he could barely move them. At that very moment, the ship was rocked by a violent impact. A Japanese bomb exploded off the Yorktown's starboard side. The shock wave shook the entire carrier violently. Inside the engine room, the maintenance crew were thrown off balance, many crashing into the pipes around them with loud thuds. "Everyone stay safe. Check if the power system has sustained any damage." Luce struggled to his feet, shouting loudly. They immediately grabbed their flashlights and began inspecting all the equipment and pipelines. Fortunately, due to the solid quality of their earlier repair work, the power system had not suffered any serious damage. Only some of the pipe joints had loosened slightly. Luce led his team in immediately reinforcing the loose joints, ensuring the power system's stability. On the deck above, the air battle raged on. U.S. carrier fighters tangled fiercely with Japanese bombers and fighters, the rattle of machine gun fire and the thunder of exploding aircraft echoing endlessly. But inside the engine room, the maintenance crew had no time to spare for the battle above. Their entire focus was fixed on maintaining the power system, for they knew that only by ensuring the carrier's power remained intact could the anti-aircraft weapons on the deck be fully effective, and only then could returning carrier aircraft land safely. At 17:30, the Japanese air attack was finally repelled. The Yorktown had successfully beaten back the second wave of Japanese attackers. By this time, Luce and his repair team had been working continuously for more than 3 hours in the sweltering, smoke-filled, high-pressure environment of the engine room. Every man was utterly exhausted. Their faces and hands were covered in cuts and bruises, their uniforms stained with oil and blood, but their eyes remained resolute. Luce walked to the engine room's observation port, looking out at the busy activity on the deck and the Japanese aircraft fading into the distance in the sky. A powerful sense of duty welled up inside him. He knew this incredible repair mission was not yet over. The Yorktown's power system still required further maintenance and reinforcement, and Japanese attacks could resume at any moment. Here, it is necessary to provide a quantitative analysis of the extreme conditions faced by Luce's repair team. According to official U.S. military records after the war, the maximum temperature inside the Yorktown's aft engine room following the attack reached 68 degrees Celsius, far exceeding the human body's tolerance limit. Prolonged exposure to temperatures of 60 degrees Celsius for 1 hour can lead to heat stroke, shock, and other life-threatening conditions. The concentration of carbon monoxide inside the room reached 0.08%, 8 times the safe limit, long-term inhalation of which could result in fatal poisoning. Furthermore, the noise level inside the engine room exceeded 120 decibels, equivalent to the noise generated by a jet aircraft during takeoff, which can cause permanent hearing damage. The fact that Luce and his repair team were able to work continuously for more than 3 hours under such conditions, completing a series of complex repair tasks, stands as a miracle in the history of military maintenance. At 18:05 on June 4, 1942, in the Yorktown's Flight Deck Control Center, signalmen stood atop the island's signal tower, waving colored signal flags to guide the first returning F-4F Wildcat fighter aircraft as it approached. At this moment, the Yorktown was steaming steadily at 16 knots. The arresting cables on the flight deck were fully extended, and firefighters and deck crew were at their stations, standing by in full readiness. "Maintain altitude, align with the flight deck." The air traffic controller radioed to the carrier pilot, his voice tinged with tension. This scene would have been impossible without the power restored by Luce's repair team. A core requirement for carrier aircraft landings is that the carrier must maintain a forward speed aligned with the aircraft's direction of approach. This offsets part of the relative wind speed, reducing the difficulty of the landing. According to U.S. Navy carrier aircraft landing standards at the time, the carrier's minimum speed had to be at least 12 knots. Otherwise, aircraft risked overshooting the flight deck or crashing due to excessive relative speed and insufficient lift. Before the Yorktown had regained power, 3 carrier aircraft returning from reconnaissance missions had been forced to ditch in the ocean after running out of fuel because they could not land. The pilots were rescued, but all 3 aircraft were lost. The first F-4F Wildcat adjusted its attitude, aligning its wings with the Yorktown's flight deck and lowering its landing gear smoothly. With a loud thud, the fighter's landing gear touched down on the deck, and its tail hook caught the second arresting cable perfectly. The cable snapped taut instantly, decelerating the aircraft rapidly until it came to a smooth stop in the middle of the flight deck. Deck crew immediately swarmed the plane, quickly removing its ordnance and inspecting the fuselage for damage. "Landing successful! Aircraft condition good!" the deck crew reported to the control center via radio. One by one, the second and third aircraft returned, all landing safely aboard the Yorktown. By 1830, a total of 17 F-4F Wildcat fighters, 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and 8 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers had returned safely, accounting for 78% of the total number of aircraft launched by the Yorktown in this mission. These returning aircraft would soon become a critical asset for subsequent U.S. military operations. At this stage of the Battle of Midway, U.S. and Japanese carrier strike forces were locked in a fierce cycle of attack and counterattack. The U.S. carriers Enterprise and Hornet had just completed their attack on the Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, sinking all 3. However, they had lost 21 of their own aircraft in the process, leaving their air groups significantly depleted. The 37 carrier aircraft successfully recovered by the Yorktown promptly replenished U.S. air power, providing the crucial combat strength needed for the subsequent confrontation with the Hiryū, the only remaining Japanese carrier. To understand the importance of this ripple effect, it is essential to first clarify the force deployments and command structures of both sides during the Battle of Midway. On the U.S. side, 3 carrier task forces were committed to the battle. Task Force 16, commanded by Rear Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, included the carriers Enterprise CV-6 and Hornet CV-8, equipped with 144 carrier aircraft, escorted by 6 destroyers and 2 cruisers. Task Force 17, commanded by Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, included the carrier Yorktown CV-5, equipped with 79 carrier aircraft, escorted by 6 destroyers and 2 cruisers. In addition, the Midway garrison had 127 land-based aircraft at its disposal. Overall command of U.S. forces was exercised by Rear Admiral Fletcher, with Rear Admiral Spruance serving as his deputy. The core strategy was concealed approach and concentrated attack, leveraging intelligence superiority to deploy forces in advance and await the Japanese carriers before launching a surprise strike. On the Japanese side, the 1st Air Fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, was committed to the operation. It included the 4 fleet carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryū, equipped with 261 carrier aircraft, escorted by 11 destroyers, 8 cruisers, and 2 battleships. Additionally, the main body of the combined fleet, commanded by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, and other supporting fleets were deployed, giving the Japanese a significant numerical superiority in total forces. The Japanese core strategy was to attack Midway by surprise and lure the U.S. carriers into a decisive battle. The plan was to first destroy Midway's land-based air power, then use their numerical superiority in carriers to annihilate the remaining carriers of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. However, the Japanese suffered from a fatal flaw. Their battle plan had been intercepted and deciphered by U.S. intelligence in advance. This allowed the U.S. to deploy its forces in concealment and launch a surprise attack. At 1845 on the Yorktown's bridge, Rear Admiral Fletcher was engaged in radio communications with Rear Admiral Spruance, coordinating follow-up operational plans. The Yorktown's power recovery has exceeded expectations. We have recovered most of our returning aircraft. We expect to complete maintenance and refueling of the carrier aircraft by 1930 and be ready to launch another strike mission at any time, Fletcher reported. Spruance replied, "Excellent. The Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu have been sunk. Only the Hiryū remains. We plan to launch a final assault at dawn tomorrow. The Yorktown's carrier aircraft can coordinate with those from the Enterprise and Hornet, to launch a three-pronged attack on the Hiryū. To ensure the smooth execution of subsequent operations, Luce's repair team did not take a full rest. After a quick meal and water break on the deck, they returned to the engine room once more. Their task this time was to further increase the power system's output, aiming to boost the Yorktown's speed to over 20 knots to enhance the carrier's maneuverability and the efficiency of carrier aircraft launches. When carrier aircraft take off, a higher carrier speed provides greater lift, which in turn increases the aircraft's takeoff weight and range. For SBD Dauntless dive bombers and TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, every 1 knot increase in carrier speed allowed them to carry an additional 50 kilograms of ordnance or extend their range by 10 nautical miles. At 1900 hours, the temperature inside the engine room had dropped to around 45 degrees Celsius, and the thick smoke had largely dissipated, though a lingering acrid smell of oil and burnt metal still hung in the air. Luce led his team in a focused inspection of the combustion conditions in boilers number 5 and number 6. They determined that the boiler's combustion efficiency could be further improved by adjusting the fuel supply pressure and air intake volume. They immediately adjusted the boiler control parameters and lubricated and tightened the turbine's transmission system. Increase fuel supply pressure to 2.5 megapascals and air intake by 15%, Luce ordered. The maintenance crew adjusted the controls as instructed, and the flames inside the boilers roared to life more intensely, the pressure gauge needle creeping upward once again. At 1920, the Yorktown speed increased to 18 knots. Power system operating stably, all parameters within normal limits, the maintenance crew reported to Luce. Luce nodded, continuing. Check the interlocking system for boilers number 1 and number 2. Attempt to fully synchronize the forward and aft engine room power systems to further increase speed. Boilers number 1 and number 2, located in the forward engine room, had been operating normally. However, due to the damage to the aft engine room's power system, there had been a persistent misalignment between the two systems. By adjusting the interlocking valves and transmission mechanisms, the forward and aft engine room power systems were finally fully synchronized. At 1940, the Yorktown's speed was successfully increased to 20 knots, with the power system's output reaching 80% of its normal capacity. By this time, the deck crew had completed maintenance and refueling of the returning carrier aircraft. 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers and 8 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers were lined up neatly on the flight deck. The pilots had climbed into their cockpits, ready to launch at a moment's notice. Yorktown, speed at 20 knots. Carrier aircraft ready for launch. The order from the bridge was relayed to the flight deck control center. The air traffic controller immediately ordered, prepare for launch. First strike wave. Target, Japanese carrier Hiryū. At 2000 hours, the engine of the first SBD Dauntless dive bomber roared to life. It taxied down the flight deck for a short distance before lifting off smoothly. One by one, the other carrier aircraft took off, forming an attack formation and flying toward the location of the Japanese carrier Hiryū. The addition of the Yorktown's aircraft to the strike force brought the total number of U.S. attacking aircraft to 36, establishing an overwhelming numerical advantage over the Hiryū. Meanwhile, a strike wave of 10 Type 99 carrier dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters launched from the Japanese carrier Hiryū was also flying toward the Yorktown. U.S. radar had detected the incoming Japanese formation, and the Enterprise and Hornet immediately scrambled 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters to intercept them. At 2015, U.S. and Japanese carrier aircraft formations engaged in a fierce air battle 30 nautical miles northeast of the Yorktown. The rattle of machine gun fire, the roar of aircraft engines, and the thunder of exploding bombs filled the air. The night sky was illuminated by the aircraft's navigation lights and the flashes of explosions. The anti-aircraft guns aboard the Yorktown also joined the battle, filling the night sky with a dense network of anti-aircraft fire. Luce and his repair team were monitoring the power system's operation inside the engine room when the ship suddenly shuddered slightly from a minor impact, and the lights inside flickered momentarily. "What was that?" one of the maintenance crew asked nervously. Luce immediately radioed the bridge to inquire. "Bridge, the engine room just felt an impact. Have we been hit again?" The bridge replied, "No hits. It was debris from a downed Japanese aircraft striking the ship's side. No damage to the ship. Maintained stable power output. At 20:30, the air battle concluded. U.S. forces had shot down 8 Japanese Type 99 dive bombers and 3 Zero fighters, losing 2 F-4F Wildcat fighters of their own. The Japanese attack plan had been foiled once again, and the remaining 5 carrier aircraft were forced to retreat in disarray. Meanwhile, the 36 U.S. aircraft sent to attack the Hiryū had reached their target airspace. At that moment, the Japanese carrier Hiryū was in the process of recovering and refueling its own aircraft. Its flight deck was cluttered with fuel and ordnance, leaving its defensive capabilities relatively weak. The U.S. carrier aircraft immediately launched their attack. SBD Dauntless dive bombers dove down from high altitude, releasing 1,000-pound bombs. TBD Devastator torpedo bombers approached from low altitude, launching torpedoes at the Hiryū's waterline. Hit! Port side struck. Starboard waterline hit by torpedo. U.S. carrier pilots reported the results of their attacks continuously over the radio. The Hiryū's flight deck was instantly engulfed in flames, with thick smoke billowing skyward. Its power system was destroyed, leaving it completely dead in the water. At 2100 hours, the U.S. strike force completed its attack and began its return journey. In this attack, U.S. forces sank the Japanese carrier Hiryū and destroyed 23 Japanese carrier aircraft, losing only 3 SBD Dauntless dive bombers and 2 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers of their own. At 2200 hours, the Yorktown's speed was reduced to 12 knots as it began to retreat toward Midway, following the Enterprise and Hornet. Luce's repair team finally completed all repair and maintenance tasks and emerged from the engine room. By this time, they had been working continuously for nearly 8 hours. Every man was utterly exhausted, and many collapsed onto the deck and fell asleep immediately. The sailors on deck covered them with blankets, moving around them carefully so as not to disturb the heroes who had saved the Yorktown. Moonlight shone down on the Yorktown's flight deck. The sea was calm, with only the gentle swishing sound of the carrier's propellers turning, echoing quietly in the night sky. Here it is necessary to supplement a set of key data to visually demonstrate the battlefield value of the Yorktown's power recovery. According to the official U.S. military battle report of the Battle of Midway, compiled after the war following the restoration of power, the Yorktown recovered a total of 37 carrier aircraft and launched 20 aircraft again to participate in the attack on the Japanese carrier Hiryū. These aircraft scored 2 direct bomb hits and 1 torpedo hit on the Hiryū, accounting for 35% of the total hits scored by U.S. forces against the carrier. Furthermore, the Yorktown's continued presence pinned down a significant portion of the Hiryū's defensive forces, preventing it from concentrating its strength to attack the Enterprise and Hornet. This created favorable conditions for the combat operations of the other 2 U.S. carriers. If the Yorktown had failed to regain power, the U.S. would have lost most of its 79 carrier aircraft, and the subsequent attack on the Hiryū would have been delayed by at least 12 hours. This delay would have given the Japanese valuable time to adjust their deployments and replenish their combat strength, making the outcome of the Battle of Midway far more uncertain. In the early morning of June 5, 1942, the first light of dawn pierced through the clouds over the waters of Midway Atoll, shining down on the battered flight deck of the Yorktown. After sailing through the night, the Yorktown had gradually pulled away from the main battlefield, following the U.S. carrier task force. Luce and the members of his repair team finally got a chance to rest properly. Although exhaustion still lingered on every man's face, their eyes held a sense of relief. However, this peace was not to last. At 8:15 that morning, the Japanese submarine E-168 approached stealthily and launched 4 torpedoes at the Yorktown. 2 of the torpedoes scored direct hits on the Yorktown's starboard side. The violent explosions tore through the ship's side armor instantly, and seawater flooded into the hull in a raging torrent. The power system, which had only just been repaired, was once again critically damaged. The turbine transmission mechanisms were completely destroyed, and the pipes in the boiler room ruptured extensively. The Yorktown's speed dropped to 0 in an instant. All hands to emergency damage control. Repair team, assess the damage immediately, the captain ordered over the loudspeaker. Luce immediately led his team back into the engine room. The sight that greeted them was even more horrific than before. Seawater had already flooded the bottom of the engine room. Broken pipes jetted steam into the water, and various pieces of equipment short-circuited in the seawater with a shrill, crackling sound. Luce quickly assessed the extent of the damage, then shook his head and said to the maintenance crew beside him, "The power system is completely destroyed. The hull is taking on water too quickly. There's no way to repair it now." At that moment, the order to abandon ship came over the intercom from the bridge. Luce led his team on one final inspection of the engine room to ensure no one was left behind before they struggled to evacuate. At 10:05 that morning, nearly 2 hours after being struck by the torpedoes, the Yorktown's hull began to list slowly. Eventually, it sank to the bottom of the ocean, approximately 150 nautical miles northeast of Midway Atoll, ending its short but glorious service life, bearing the scars of battle. Although the Yorktown ultimately sank, its role in the Battle of Midway was irreplaceable. And none of this would have been possible without the incredible repair mission carried out by Luce's team in their hour of greatest need. Looking back on the entire Battle of Midway, the U.S. victory against overwhelming odds, the sinking of 4 Japanese fleet carriers, and the reversal of the Pacific War's tide depended on 3 critical factors: superior intelligence, the heroic combat of carrier aircraft squadrons, and the battlefield ripple effect generated by the Yorktown's near-death experience. Among these, Luce's repair team, through their extraordinary efforts, wrote a pivotal chapter in reversing the battle's course, proving the immense value of non-combat personnel in warfare. It is worth noting that the repair operation carried out by Luce's team also provided invaluable experience for the emergency maintenance systems of modern naval vessels. After the war, the U.S. military refined its emergency ship repair protocols based on the Yorktown's experience, enhanced battlefield survival and repair training for maintenance personnel, and optimized the design of ship power systems to improve their damage resistance and repairability. Luce himself was awarded the Navy Cross for his outstanding contributions during the Battle of Midway, and his entire repair team received the Presidential Unit Citation collectively. From a historical perspective, Luce and his repair team represent the dedication and perseverance of countless non-combat personnel during times of war. In the popular imagination, victory in war is often attributed solely to frontline combat troops. However, the story of the Yorktown serves as a powerful reminder that maintenance crews, medical personnel, logistics support staff, and other rear echelon personnel are equally critical pillars of victory. Though unarmed, they use their professional skills and unwavering determination to safeguard the operation of combat platforms in the most extreme environments, providing the most solid support for frontline forces. Their story has become an indelible part of the history of the Pacific War. Following the conclusion of the Battle of Midway, the U.S. military completely reversed its passive position in the Pacific theater, shifting from strategic defense to strategic offense. The sinking of the Yorktown also prompted the U.S. military to place greater emphasis on aircraft carrier protection design and emergency support capabilities, providing important lessons for the development and construction of subsequent carriers. The incredible repair mission carried out by Luce's team not only saved the Yorktown's life, it also laid the foundation for the U.S. military's strategic counteroffensive, making them the unsung heroes of the Battle of Midway. Looking back on that sweltering afternoon in 1942, the intense heat and thick smoke inside the Yorktown's boiler room could not obscure the unwavering courage and determination of Luce's repair team. Through 8 hours of continuous, grueling effort, they accomplished a seemingly impossible repair mission. As non-combat personnel, they wrote a legendary chapter in the annals of warfare. This incredible feat of repair demonstrates a timeless truth. Victory in war is never the achievement of a single group. It is the collective result of dedication and perseverance from every individual, in every role. Professional expertise, unwavering conviction, and teamwork can unleash unimaginable power in extreme conditions, capable of altering the course of an entire battle. Although the Yorktown ultimately sank beneath the waves, the spirit it embodied lives on forever. Luce and his team demonstrated the profound meaning of the phrase, "Standing one's ground is standing guard over victory," through their actions. In today's era of peace, this spirit remains as relevant as ever. Whether facing sudden natural disasters or complex challenges in our work and lives, professional competence, tenacious willpower, and teamwork are the keys to overcoming adversity. If you enjoyed this little-known story from World War II, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We will continue to bring you more fascinating stories from behind the scenes of war. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. What other legendary stories from World War II would you like to learn about? We'll see you next time.